Hello. Hi. Thanks, Matt. I'm Tom McCambridge. I'm head of creative at Athernet, and my colleague John, who's head of technical. We're here to talk through a case study, really, a project that we recently took part with the BBC on earlier this year about personalisation on the BBC homepage. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background about personalisation on the BBC products as a whole, and then John's going to sort of talk through what we came up with and how we implemented our idea. Our Twitter tag there, where obviously we encourage you to follow us and whatnot. Tweet any questions. We'll be handling some questions at the end, but if anything springs to mind after the presentation, feel free to drop us a line. So a little bit about Athernet. We're a full-service digital agency based in Manchester, and we work across sort of web, mobile apps, and deliver all kinds of projects for a really wide range of clients, basically. And what we do is try and bring the creative, technical and marketing into all the projects that we do, which is really what appealed to us, what attracted us to this project in particular, because we thought we could come up with something really innovative for personalisation on the homepage, but also make it usable and make the interface for that something really clever. So that's a little bit about us. Okay, so about the BBC homepage and personalisation itself. Personalisation on the homepage has been something we've been trying to experiment with for quite some time now. This is version 3 of the homepage that was live about 3 or 4 years ago now. I don't know if some of you might remember this homepage, but what it allowed you to do with these boxes here, you could drag around and you could edit the content that appeared in each of those boxes. So it really allowed you to try and make a version of the homepage that was tailored to you. The problem with that was less than 10% of the users on the website actually use any of these features. And in terms of numbers, BBC homepage gets about 9 million hits a week, unique hits across all the devices. And like I said, less than 10% of those were actually using these features, and the vast majority of people didn't even know that they existed. So that wasn't really working for them, even though it was technically quite a good concept. So fast forward to today, and this is the homepage that's currently live at the minute, which what they've done is they've really stripped back the personalisation to just being able to change the location of there. It says London, you can click on that and change it to Bradford or Manchester or whatever, and it'll change a couple of the news stories here and give you sort of localised weather information. So it's really stripped back compared to what was there before. And so when BBC transitioned from the homepage that we saw before into this version, it got quite a lot of mixed reviews. People were enraged that they'd gone to a much more media-focused homepage and that they changed the design so much. And that obviously people took to the blogs, come back doing reviews of the new site. What it really did was emphasise that personalisation was something that they still wanted to achieve and people still wanted on the homepage. In fact, one of my favourite quotes is this one. Why not let's have a page where there could be little boxes containing various items from all the diverse web content that the BBC provide, little boxes that could be moved around, added to or removed as you sees fit. Well, that's what they had. But it didn't actually work because nobody knew they were there. So that emphasises the point that they want it, but it needed to take a lot less energy to create a personalised homepage. And obviously the BBC saw the benefit in that as well, which is why earlier this year like I said, they've been trying to tackle it for some time, but they run these Connected Studio events. There's a couple of people in the room who we've seen there, and so we attended one of these, and it was really to try and push innovation, to bring in sort of outsiders from the BBC to get an outsider's perspective and give new ideas and try and implement these. So they published a brief about it. As with all client briefs, it was a little bit contradictory and a little bit vague. But what they were saying things like, "Oh, we like what Pinterest are doing with personalisation and Converse shoe builder," but they weren't really relevant to their industry. There were 3 things that really stood out for us. The first being to maintain this discovery engine aspect of the homepage, the fact that people come to the homepage to get onto information that they might not necessarily have come for, but may be of interest to them. How to balance that new content with what they did come for. So a lot of people we spoke to, like parents, said they'd go straight to the homepage, straight into search for CBBC or CBeebies. So how do you balance that with the discovery content? And finally, the UX. If we're going to put something in place that's going to personalise the homepage, how does that actually work? What's the interface that you apply to that? Obviously, dragging boxes and editing the modules and stuff didn't really work, so how do you get over that barrier? So the BBC sort of future media mantra is that it's one service with 10 products across 4 screens. These are obviously the 10 products, a few of the bigger ones you'll know, like CBBC, News, Sport and whatnot, but there's also the lesser important, lesser known ones like Knowledge and Learning, CBeebies and whatnot. But the audience for these is still massive. I mean, like I said, the BBC homepage alone gets 9 million unique hits a week. And the 4 screens obviously being IPTV, desktop, stroke laptop, smartphones and tablets. So it was really important that whatever we came up with had to work across all of these devices. And I'm not just talking sort of responsive design or anything that would sort of fit each of the devices, but also create a seamless experience, something that you might be out and about looking at news on your phone, and you might want to still have that same level of personalisation when you get home and pick up your iPad. So that was really important to us. So that's really a bit of background about the project, and now John's going to talk through what we actually came up with. John?
Absolutely. Well, if you haven't worked with the BBC before, you might have some kind of conception of what they do. It's about TV, it's about radio, it's about entertainment, something like that. But they see themselves as something different, as being about editorial content. So on the homepage, we might have sections like these. We've got some news content, some pictures, we've got TV programmes, and things are being recommended. And one of the really big parts of the brief of redesigning that part of the homepage is making sure that we kept the editorial content on that page and left the BBC in control of what was being displayed. So it's not a case of showing the users absolutely anything off the site. It's about picking certain things and prioritising those that the BBC wanted to show. So this had to inform us through the process, and we had to use that in whatever solution that we came up with. We decided to look at quite a few aspects. And to do this, we looked at a typical user. Here's James, he's using the website. He goes on it pretty much every day, but sometimes he looks at different things. He likes different parts of the website, and what we want to do is tailor the experience just for him. So he gets the content that's relevant to him, that he wants to use, and can find it much more easily than just browsing the website normally. So it's about personalising it without going down to the level of James needing to go on and set things or say, I like this, I don't like this. Zero effort personalisation. So to look at this, we looked at the website. And there's lots of sections or categories on the website that people use. And for this example with James, we've got some different sections here. So he's looked at quite a lot of news, which is this large bar over here. And that shows that he spent a lot of time in that news section. And then there's other areas like weather and iPlayer, where he spends a little bit of time, maybe checking the weather each day if he's going somewhere, wants to know where to take an umbrella, which if he's in Manchester is pretty much every day. iPlayer, watching some content, catching up on some TV or radio. But then on the left we've got CBBC and CBeebies, and maybe it's his kids who are looking at that on his computer. So it's a case of building all of that in and looking at which areas the user looks at. So we took a look at some profiles like this and decided that these sections should be important on the homepage. If you never ever look at the learning section or knowledge and learning, as the BBC call it, then why display that on the homepage as a priority? Sure, there might be some editorial content that the BBC wants to push out there and display to users, but it shouldn't be the main area. It should be slightly further down, maybe even below the fold, so it's still visible and the user can still get to it, but it's not a priority. We then took a look at the pages, and certain users will look at certain things. So it might be that you go on the news website or on the sports part of the website, and you look at certain keywords. So you've got things like Formula 1, Monaco Grand Prix, London Games, Lewis Hamilton. James is obviously very interested in Formula One, and also a little bit in the Olympic Games, which was relevant at the time that we did the project. And by looking at the keywords of what's in that page, what we could do is build up a profile of that user and say, well, this user likes to look at this, so maybe they'd like to look at that. And rather than just taking it and saying, well, this is a sport website, this is Formula One content, what we decided to do was to apply this across all of the website. So if you looked at Lewis Hamilton and you were checking up what he's doing on the sport website, and then he appears on a cookery show, it would suggest that to you as well. It might be somebody you're interested in, whatever section of the website they're in. The same if there's something like cars, car maintenance, Formula One, if that's on maybe a history programme, the history of Formula One, well, we'll suggest that as well. So it's about tailoring that experience and bringing the new content to the user. We couldn't actually use any of the keywords that are on the website because the BBC are building up their tagging database at the moment, and they're building into a lot of the content different tagging metadata that can be used in the future. And the first big project for this was with the Olympic Games, so hopefully that's something that could be built in the future to add in even better control of that. So for this example, we used quite a simple word list. We then thought about James, and well, he uses the site on different days of the week. And here's maybe a typical profile for him, with the blue bars being the news section and the red the sport. So it could well be that he's at work every day, he checks the news, he wants to see what's going on, he might check it in his lunch break, he might check it in the morning, and views certain content on there. But come the weekend, he doesn't really care about that as much. He'd much rather catch up with the Formula One, watch the sport, see what's going on at home, because it's leisure time rather than work time, and people have different priorities on different days of the week. So we decided to take this into account and build in a little bit of profiling to see which sections people looked at on which days of the week, and to tailor the suggestions to them. And to do this, we banded it quite simply into weekdays and weekend, and this is something that maybe could be developed much further in the future if it was taken further, because that would give us a much finer grain of control over what the user's doing and be able to tailor that much more to those users. We also looked at the hour of the day, and what's really interesting is that the BBC have a lot of research on the time of day and how much usage their websites get. And this is a rough approximation of one of their graphs which shows the BBC News website usage. So there's a big peak at lunchtime when people are at work and they want to read the news in their lunch break. And there may be a couple of peaks either side, and it tails off towards the evenings and at night time. So we looked at this and said, well, how can we control this and tailor the user experience to deliver the content when people want it? It might be that at night you look at certain things, in the day other things. So we broke this down into three distinct areas. We had the morning area, which is until about breakfast time. We had the daytime area, and then also the evening area. And this meant that we could control what people were viewing in certain times of the day, which is a really important personalisation aspect, and we found it is a really good idea for seeing what users do. But it also means we can broadly band it, which gets around some of the issues that maybe the schedule changes one day, we could look at something different. There might be other things in your schedule and your priority of what you're doing. So in total, we looked at a few different areas. We looked at the categories or the brands or the sections of the website, and by using those to put into the design of the homepage, we decided that could tailor the main sections, the main bits that are shown. For a little bit more control, we've got keywords that work across all of those categories or sections, and building those in would let us show content that's relevant to that user, something they're interested in, and track the kinds of things that they like. We then looked at the days of the week, so it would be weekday, weekend, and how those could factor into that. And finally, the time of the day. So we had 4 different things to take into account in the personalisation, and we think that those 4 things are key to delivering personalised content on the homepage and the kinds of things that people will want to see. So how did we implement this? Because it was for the Connected Studio, it was a proof of concept. And what normally happens when you view the BBC website is your PC has a direct connection to the website. But what we needed to do was to take a look at what users are doing. So for our subset of users who were testing this out and trialling the system, we decided to introduce a proxy server. And this was a web service that we built that handles all of the requests to the BBC website and would identify what the user's looking at and take into account those 4 different areas from before that we were analysing, and we track that for each user. It would then pass that onto the BBC website, so we get the content back as well. We could identify keywords within that content and store those for future use within a database. And this is sort of similar to how we see it being set up if the BBC did go ahead with it, because it gives us a good control and we can track what users are doing, we can see what's going on, but we wouldn't need the proxy server. That would all be handled on the BBC side. So it would all be handled on their servers, storing the user preferences. So here's an example of a homepage, a basic layout showing what's displayed to the user. It's laid out on a block layout like the BBC's homepage, and by using that layout it gives us a good control over what happens, but it's also responsive, so it will work on multiple devices. And in the top left we've got the sports section. James likes looking at sport at weekends, so perhaps this is an example from the weekend, and that would display sport content, maybe some editorial content, but also the kinds of things that James is interested in. So rather than it being about tennis, it will be about Formula 1, because he's shown a clear preference for that. We then have the news section on the right, but if he's looking at the Formula 1, the Monaco Grand Prix, it might have some news from Monaco in there. It might have certain things related to that. We then have some more smaller boxes at the bottom, which would have other suggested content. So perhaps food, we've got Lewis Hamilton on a cookery show. In the learning, we've got something about history or the way that the Formula 1 cars work. And then we could have some other suggestions at the bottom. So rather than all of it being tailored to the user, we chuck in some random wildcards of editorial content from the BBC, and that would maintain that discovery aspect, the discovery engine that the BBC like, and draw people to new content that maybe they hadn't thought about exploring before. And it's quite important to mix those within the user experience, because the only way that people find out about things is by seeing them. And if you're always looking for the same content, taking the same journey every time, then you won't find them. So here's an example of another page which has been created for a user on a different day. And we've got the news content in the top left, so maybe they're near Ellesmere Port, they're in Manchester, so that's local to them, and it's displaying localised news. We've then got the sport in the top right, so we've got the cricket shown here. So rather than showing the tennis or the football, it's the cricket, because that's what they're interested in. We've then got food, we've got the chicken korma, maybe they like curry, as everyone here does. And they've looked at curry before, so it's given them a suggestion, why don't you try this one? This is something new, something different. And suggesting those things to the user. We then got an episode of The Apprentice, so maybe they've watched The Apprentice for the last few weeks, and they've watched it every week, and we know that, so we can say, watch it this week. And finally, a wildcard, something that's chucked in by the BBC to say, try this new content, something new, whether you like it or not, have a look. We then have a slightly different arrangement of the site, and this is after they've browsed around a little bit more. So maybe they've been looking at some more of the cricket news, and the kids have been on and looked at CBBC and CBeebies. And the homepage dynamically regenerates every time that you view new content. So as we're building up this database of the kinds of things that you see, it will rebuild and reconfigure this homepage. And every time you come back, you'll see a slightly different arrangement, but it will still be in a familiar style, and some of the content will be the same. But things like the news has gone smaller, as it's less of a priority at this time. Maybe other things have been introduced, like CBBC, and the food's dropped off because maybe you're not looking at food and you haven't looked at it for a while, so we're not going to suggest that to you. One of the things that came out in our user testing of this was that people would want to say, yes, I like this, or no, I don't. So we introduced the like or dislike buttons, and these will be placed on the content on the homepage. And you can up and down vote things and say, I like this, I don't like this, and that would mean that we can tailor the content even further. So maybe one time you looked at something, you went and looked at recipes, but you never want to see them again because you're the worst cook in the world and nobody will let you near the kitchen after the disaster last time. Well, why show them on there? Downvote it and we'll take them off and we'll give you something new, something more relevant to you. So there is a little bit of user control in there, but you don't need to do that to begin with, because it's zero effort and it will be built up automatically as you use the site. You might be wondering how this builds in to the 4 screens that the BBC use. And what we decided to do was to integrate it across the 4 screens using a zero login principle. So if you go and view something on your laptop, and then you go onto your phone, well, you want the same personalised content. So what we'll do is we'll carry this across to the phone, and we'll maybe display something slightly different. If you tend to look at the news more rather than the sport on your phone, things on the go might be a little bit different. But we'll carry across the same keywords. So if you've just read quite a long article about the Grand Prix, then when you go onto your phone, it will tell you, here's the latest news, catch up with it, and it will automatically carry that across. And the same if you go on the tablet, where maybe you're viewing more video content or iPlayer content, and the TV, which is much more media focused. To enable these to be transferred across devices, we came up with a simple concept, which we called the Me code. And this is generated randomly the first time you visit the site on any device. And it's just a simple string of letters and numbers that you can input between devices. And then the BBC website will know that that's you. There's no registration information, no password, nothing like that. And we don't store any details about the user. And by doing that, it means that people aren't going to be worried about sharing that information. If somebody started using your PC, well, your suggestions might be different depending on what they looked at, but they can't get at any of your personal information, they can't do anything as you. There are some sections of the BBC website where they are having logins now, and this system could be integrated with those. So once you're logged in, it would also bring in that personalisation and build up the pages for you. So that's a way of sharing it between different devices that you might use the website on.
So yeah, that really sums up sort of the concept that we came up with. It's probably worth mentioning, we do this quite regularly. We like to sort of share the innovation that we come up with and how we come up with it. In fact, we actually run our own seminars from time to time. The next one's on mobile responsive in December. If anyone would like to come to that, please feel free, just get in touch and give you the details for that. We're running quite a bit short, but if anyone's got any questions, then I'd be more than happy to answer.
We haven't done too much user testing on the Me codes, other than maybe with the tech-savvy users who understand what's going on with those. So we do realise that there would need to be a way of people doing that quite easily and simply. But we think that by using just that short string, then people will catch on to what it does. Maybe it will need to be built into the user interface and explained to users. But generally people do respond to things quite well with websites and devices like this. And if you are using it on multiple devices, you probably are quite a tech-savvy user as well. Which is something we'd like to.
Sorry, just on that point, when we spoke to a focus group about the Me codes, they actually quite liked the idea of just being able to bookmark their personal homepage. This was only in front of a small group, but they were quite sort of receptive to that. Yeah, did you have a question?
How do you feel about people being kind of trapped in a bubble of preferences and not being able to discover new things without being enforced in the bubble of their previous behaviour?
We absolutely hate that idea of being trapped. So do the BBC, and that's why we had that discovery engine aspect and those wildcards. So it's about bringing new content to users, but maybe things that are relevant. So there's lots of content on the BBC website. It's absolutely huge. That if you're looking for something, you need to know where to go and what it is you're looking for. And our idea is to bring that content that maybe you're looking for to you, but also incorporate those wildcards and different aspects and editorial content. And we still want to have a certain level of control over that.
So you're still basing that on the preferences that you've already got.
Yeah.
So effectively you're still in the bubble.
You maybe are in a smaller bubble. There's certain aspects that are slightly restricted on what you see, but it's restricted in a way that would give you easier access rather than limiting access. So we think that there needs to be a balance between those two, and maybe a decision on how much editorial content should be pushed, where it should be pushed, and what priority it should be given.
Is there a kind of a mechanism for breaking out of it if you want to?
Absolutely. If you go to the website about cookie sets or whatever, then you'll automatically be broken up back to the default home page. But along with the me code, there'll be a clear button, and that will just reset it for you. So if somebody does use your computer and there's weird suggestions, you can clear it. But also, with the cookie law at the moment and how people need to be able to opt out of that, we'd also have to have an opt-out system so it says never track what I do, which quite controversial, we'll probably drop a cookie to say that. But by putting that in, it would give people the option to never track it, never have that control over it.
Did any of the users struggle with the fact that, you know, on multiple occasions they're going to be seeing different things in different places? So, you know, if you're a consistent user of a website, would you not expect to see things in certain places, and if they weren't there, because you're moving it about twice a day, 3 times a day, could that not get confusing if that's you're regularly using it?
Well, when we did the focus groups and the user testing, they didn't really notice that happening because we've kept the same style of homepage and it's still in that block layout, and it's just that things are growing and shrinking on that page. And when we did some tests with them, we found that people didn't really know where that content was going to be anyway, because at the moment the BBC move those around manually, and as things become an editorial priority, they'll put them near the top, they'll put them on different pages, and you have to scroll through to find them. So the homepage isn't really that fixed anyway, and what it was about giving a bit more visibility to the things that the user would like.
Yeah, so coming back to my earlier point, prior to this, what the BBC found was that people come straight to the homepage and searching for that information because, again, it didn't really know where it was anyway. So it was just a way of sort of overcoming that barrier and putting it in places at the time of day. So as soon as they land on the homepage, even though they've come for CVPs on an evening, it's there, and it just takes that step out of having to search for it.
I'm interested in what the user testing was like on that serendipity, the wildcard idea. Did everyone like it?
It's mixed reviews.
So it was mixed reviews, but it's basically what the BBC do at the moment because they don't know anything about you.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of research on serendipity, mainly in iPhone spontaneous selection when you play with stuff. And clearly it's a bimodal distribution. Some people really hate it, and some people really like it. And it's quite tricky, this whole adaptivity thing. When people get an image that the system's changing to them, and it does something weird, they then flip and say, "Wretched machine, what the hell is it doing?" Pound, pound, pound. So it's a really tricky one to get right.
Absolutely. It's like when you go to the supermarket and you get the club card voucher and it suggests a product for you that you've got no idea why because you've never bought anything like it. And maybe users would find that a little bit strange after they know what's going on and see their preferences day after day. But it is up to the BBC at the end of the day what content they push, and it would just need to be explained somewhere, and users would probably get used to that.
Blame the bee.
I hope there's not too many of them
Yeah, just with on tablet devices, with other print media, like X-print media, if you like, there's a different spike. It's a spike at the beginning of the day when it flattens out during the day, and then it peaks later on in the day, I don't know, 6, 7, something like that. You mentioned some logic to deal with that, but it's a tricky problem because people are. It's also, there is research to say that people read different things at different times of the day as well on the different devices, so it does all get complex, as mentioned earlier. So what's your logic about that?
Well, to make it simple for building the prototype and demonstrating it, we did break it down into those time bands, but what we could do is we could break it down into finer time bands, or even track the time of day, and then use a bit more complex algorithm to process those to work out some suggestions. So we do realise that there is quite a lot we could take into account, especially when you're looking at sites like news, which have got lots of content, and maybe lots of things which change day by day, and you're looking at completely different things. So there is a lot more work needed on that, but as a general homepage, it did tend to work very well with that time of day banding.
So you got the technology to deal with it, basically?
Absolutely, we do. It was just a case of simplifying it to demonstrate the principle and demonstrate it to the focus groups.
Yeah. That's good.
Did you speak to anyone at BBC editorial about this?
Yeah.
Because what you're doing there is replacing an editor with an algorithm. And somebody makes an editorial choice about what goes on homepage like they do on the front page of a newspaper. I'm always nervous about this shift from human to algorithm just because we can.
Well, can I provide some more input? I work at BBC Sport, and one of the things that we've got, I work in tech, so one of the things that we've produced for BBC Sport is automated algorithms for Premiership and Championship matches. So, not just matches, but pages for their teams. So, if you hook in the URL, Premiership or Manchester United, for example, up on the page, it's automatically generated. So, initially, it was thought that there might be some resistance from editorial because we've got a fantastic editorial team for BBC on history. We expected resistance, but it wasn't because it allowed them the freedom to be able to focus their attention elsewhere. They know there's going to be, for example, writing content to go on the Manchester United page. So everything else, for example, all the stats were able to be provided for them. They didn't have to go on look for the stats when they were available. So this might assist the editorial team to free themselves up for when they do that.
But there's a subtle difference between automating content choices within a single content context, like the main United page, versus what is actually an editorial decision, which is which stories make the main page of the website. And it's interesting because the spectrum of outcomes from a newspaper through to a data feed contains a number of different outcomes. I just feel that this moves a website away from an editorial proposition towards a data feed. So there's a tech success there. We have to be very careful which babies we're throwing out in this problem.
Yeah, it is a very tricky problem. And in some ways, the homepage acts as a portal to the other content on the BBC sites. So this wouldn't affect things like the news site, where maybe there's a lot more editorial control and ongoing control. But it's just that first page that the users see when they go to the site, and where are you going to go today? It's almost giving them suggestions as to what to discover, rather than taking that control away. But I think maybe there was some nervousness when we did pitch the idea about this editorial control, but it was part of the brief to take that away. So maybe there are some thoughts around doing that and automating that more internally.
Just a comment really, sort of reply to your just flipping on its head, is actually that loss of editorial control a bad thing, because in some ways what's happening is that editorial control is being passed to the consumer. And so being an editor is actually a position of power, because you get to set the agenda that everybody else then listens to. And you could argue by actually handing that power back to, I'm getting the grimace back to consumers, then are you democratizing access to information? Are you letting people select what they're interested in more? I don't know, maybe that's not such a bad thing, really. It's just we look at tradition and thinking it's bad.
Like, if you look at the wider picture in recommender systems, which yours is just one instance, it's a three-way battle now between personalisation driven off traffic analysis, like search, which you're doing essentially, the editorial control, which is the owner, and then the other one is then the semantic net, so you actually spread out on a semantic net of related terms, either with your friends, social traffic, or just general ontologies. And a lot of the debate in the recommender world is how do you balance those three between the people who want the editorial, so the top story gets weighted, versus the personalised, versus the group.
I think at an individual level, it's interesting, but for an organisation like BBC, they're so keen on editorial voice. There's a tone of voice created through the cumulative choice of stories in a single way. But I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think we just have to be careful.
Yeah, definitely.
That not to forget that the human editorial choices made by a senior editor of a complete proposition are part of the value set that we often deliver through these systems.
No, I mean, I agree. I work with the Times quite a lot, and the editors were not pleased. Well, we talked about personalisation, but when it actually came to it, and we delivered sort of just rough concepts on that, digital editors. What do you mean? You're going to move my top story down? Well, that's a consequence of personalisation. Well, we don't want that.
Well, it's a different kind of product.
It is.
Did it say what their objective is?
Yeah, and we've taken editorial control away. this is from a political point of view, whether you agree with the Times or not, it doesn't really matter. The owners and proprietors and editors of the Times want this particular story as a header, and then they want that one as a second, they want that one as a third, they want that one as a fourth.
But then it was about political control.
It's about control, yeah, editorial.
But I'd say you still have a certain amount of editorial control based upon the database of associated news and information. So someone's making those decisions, presumably it's not an algorithm making it up going, if you like curry, you might be interested in India. I'm sure somebody's saying, if you like curry, you might be interested in curry recipes. So is there an organisation, a department, or a mass group of people who are responsible for associating these things together? So if I do look at Formula 1, I'll get news about a racing driver, as opposed to news about tyres.
Yeah, this is all part of sort of the semantic tagging system that you mentioned. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, essentially it's something that's in progress.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I think
Those,
that's pretty much it. Yeah. Cool. Well,
Okay.
thank you very much. Cheers.